There is a date on the calendar, November 10th, 2026. Almost nobody outside a few offices knows. Almost nobody outside a few Pentagon offices and Brussels boardrooms is talking about it. They should be. On that day, a single signature in Beijing could squeeze the supply of 5 metals. Metals the West cannot make, cannot replace, cannot easily do without. They sit inside every F-35 fighter, every Tesla, every wind turbine, every MRI scanner, every AI server farm being built right now. You will not see this story on the front page. You will see it after. One country processes around 90% of the world's rare earth metals. That country is China. What they decide next could quietly reshape the global economy in ways you have not yet been told. This is how that happened, and what happens next. Most people picture something exotic, something dug from a remote mine, something that matters to a few scientists. That picture is wrong. Rare earths are not actually rare. The earth has plenty. What is rare, almost impossibly rare, is the ability to separate and refine them. That ability sits, almost entirely, in one place. S&P Global tracks the same number as the European Parliament think tank. Pull out your phone. There are rare earths inside it. The little vibration motor alone, that is neodymium. The speakers, neodymium. The camera lens stabilizer, neodymium. 3 separate components, 1 element, 1 country. Look at the lights overhead. If they are LEDs, there is yttrium and europium in the phosphor. Drive an electric vehicle. The motor magnets, dysprosium, terbium, neodymium, all rare earths, all Chinese processed. Fly in a modern fighter jet. Each F-35 contains hundreds of kilograms of rare earth alloy. One country, 90% of all of it. That is the situation as we sit here today. Watch what happens next. October 2025, Beijing restricts 5 elements. Then, weeks later, it suspends the controls for 1 year. To understand the leverage, you have to understand the chemistry first. Quickly, painlessly, I promise you. Rare earths sit at the bottom of the periodic table in a row called the lanthanides. There are 15 of them, plus 2 more, scandium and yttrium, that behave similarly. Together, 17 elements. Their unusual property is magnetism, dense, stable, and extremely resistant to heat. The charge doesn't fade. It holds under pressure, under vibration, under extreme heat. A neodymium iron-boron magnet was invented in the early 1980s. It can be the size of a coin. It can lift hundreds of times its own weight. Nothing else in the periodic table can do that at that price point. This single chemical property is what built the modern world. Wind turbines need rare earth magnets to convert blade rotation into electricity efficiently. Without them, nothing works. Electric vehicle motors need them to convert battery power into torque without overheating. Hard drives, headphones, microphones, industrial robots, guided munitions, satellite stabilizers, submarine sonar, rare earths in every one. Hold this image. In your pocket, on your wrist, on this screen. More Chinese industrial leverage sits there than most governments admit. Here is the second part of the chemistry problem. Mining rare earths is one thing. The ore is scattered across many countries: Australia, the United States, Vietnam, Brazil, India, Greenland. The hard part is separation. It consumes huge volumes of acid, vast electricity, and decades of expertise. a regulatory tolerance for hazardous waste that most democracies no longer have. The 17 elements are chemically almost identical. To pull them apart, you need solvent extraction, hundreds of repeated chemistry stages, immense volumes of acid, a tailings residue that often contains thorium, a mildly radioactive byproduct. That is the work in places like Baotou, Inner Mongolia, vast complexes, decades old, still running. Vast processing complexes, decades old, refined to a level of efficiency no Western facility currently matches. There is only one large commercial-scale rare earth separation plant operating outside China. It is called Lynas. It mines in Western Australia. It separates in Malaysia. One small-scale facility exists in Estonia. There are pilot projects in Texas and France. Australian and American officials have noted the same conclusion. A gap of at least several years exists. None of these facilities can displace Chinese capacity anytime soon. This is not a problem the West has ignored. It is one they have spent a decade trying to fix, with billions of dollars, for nearly a decade, and the gap has not meaningfully closed. So how did one country get so far ahead? That is the question. The answer may surprise you. That is the question that takes us into Chapter 2. The answer is not what most people assume. The story of how Beijing won this race begins not in a boardroom. It begins in one sentence. It begins in a single sentence, spoken in 1992, by a man most Western viewers know, but in a completely different context. The race was already decided long before 2025. The rest of the world simply did not know it yet. Deng Xiaoping was the architect of China's economic opening. In 1992, he toured southern China. During that tour, he reportedly said a single line. Decades later, it looks like a strategic doctrine. The Middle East has oil. China has rare earths. That sentence was not a boast, it was a plan. In 1992, China was already the world's largest producer of rare earth ore. Most of the world saw a low-value commodity business, dirty, cheap, and unglamorous. But ore alone is not leverage. What followed over the next 20 years was the most patient industrial policy ever. Beijing did three things at once. First, it consolidated. Hundreds of small rare earth operations were merged into state-coordinated giants. Second, it invested heavily in the boring, dangerous, low-margin work of separation chemistry nobody else wanted to do. Third, this is the part the West did not see in time. China priced its output below Western rivals. No competitor could match it. By the late 1990s, the largest rare earth mine in the United States was being undercut. That mine was Mountain Pass. It eventually shut down its separation operations. By 2002, it was essentially out of business as a refiner. The expertise scattered. The chemists retired. The supply chain calcified around China. In the UK, in Australia, in France, in Japan, the same pattern. Western producers could not compete on price, so they stopped competing. This was not a secret. Industry insiders warned about it for years. But rare earths sit in such tiny quantities inside finished goods that the wider economy never felt the dependency forming. A car might contain a few kilograms of rare earth magnets, a wind turbine a few hundred, a cruise missile a handful. Nobody ever picks up a price signal. So the West outsourced, quietly, comprehensively. In 2010, Beijing reminded the world that this was leverage. That year, China unofficially halted rare earth shipments to Japanese firms. The trigger was a diplomatic dispute over a contested island in the East China Sea. Within weeks, electronics manufacturers were rationing inventory. Prices spiked. Tokyo got the message and the dispute eased. The 2010 episode is the single most important precedent in this entire story. Understand what Beijing learned that year. The threat alone, not the cutoff, the threat itself could move governments. It learned this 15 years before October 2025. In the years that followed, Western governments commissioned reports. The Pentagon ran studies. The European Union published critical minerals strategies. Australia and the United States signed cooperation agreements. And yet, here we are, in June 2026. China's share of global processing is still hovering around 90%. That is not a story of Western inattention. It is a story of how slow it is to rebuild an industrial capability once you have given it away. Which brings us to last year. Because in October 2025, Beijing did something it had been threatening to do, and it changed the calculation overnight. This is the moment the modern supply chain crisis begins. On October 9, 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce, MOFCOM, published two new notices. To the average reader, they looked like dry export licensing paperwork. To the rare earth industry, they were a thunderclap. Here's the short version. Beijing just gave itself the power to approve who receives rare earths, anywhere. Now, the detail. Notice 61 expanded China's export control framework. 5 additional rare earth elements now require an export license, including the heavy lanthanides that defense and aerospace industries depend on most. These are the critical ones. And critically, they introduced an extraterritorial provision modeled on the way the United States restricts semiconductors. The rule covered not just exports from China. It covered products manufactured anywhere in the world. Products containing controlled Chinese origin material above a specified threshold. Think of it this way. The reach is global. A German magnet factory buys Chinese refined neodymium. It sells a finished magnet to a Korean car maker. That downstream transaction now needs Beijing's approval. That had never been the case before. The reaction was immediate. Industry reports from late 2025 describe European and Japanese manufacturers experiencing delays. Applications denied without clear reason. Licensing decisions running far below normal pre-2025 levels. European industry groups cite a widely shared estimate. Approval rates for European firms well below 1 in 4. Though, in fairness, Beijing has consistently characterized the system as a licensing regime, not a ban. The economic disruption was severe. 4 weeks later, Beijing announced the controls would be suspended for 1 year. This came as part of a broader trade understanding reached at the Trump-Xi meeting in Gyeongju, South Korea at the end of October 2025. That suspension was logged at the European Parliament think tank, at China Briefing, and across the industry trade press. Pause. Look at the date again. November 10th, 2026. That is 139 days away. 139 days. Here is what happens if Beijing lets the suspension lapse. Analysts at Discovery Alert, EBC Financial, and the European Parliament brief describe this scenario. The IEA April 2026 report estimated annual economic impact at up to $6.5 trillion outside China. The automotive sector alone is exposed to over $3 trillion of that. In other words, the gap will not close before the November deadline. Picture what happens on November 10th. All 5 elements return to full export control coverage, simultaneously, including the extraterritorial provisions. That means the controls hit downstream factories in Germany, South Korea, Japan, and the United States. Anyone, anywhere, using Chinese refined material in a finished product. The industries first in line are those with the highest dependency. Defense electronics, aerospace alloys, electric vehicle motors, semiconductor equipment, medical imaging, all of it exposed. The Pentagon's own supply chain disclosures have repeatedly identified F-35 magnet supply as a known vulnerability. Each F-35 contains hundreds of kilograms of rare earth alloy. The F-35 supply chain sourced Chinese refined inputs until recently. The UK already named rare earths a Tier 1 risk. Lynas, headquartered in Australia with processing in Malaysia, is the only commercial-scale non-Chinese separator today. It is not large enough to fill the gap. India has monazite reserves on the Kerala coast. Indian Rare Earths Limited has been expanding. The timeline is multi-year. So why has Beijing not simply pulled the trigger? That answer is more interesting than the threat itself. Because here is what the headlines often miss. The thing Beijing built is not a weapon designed to be fired. It is a weapon designed to never need to be. That distinction is everything. In game theory, there is an idea called credible threat. A weapon you use once loses much of its value. The other side adapts, builds alternatives, hedges. The shock fades. A weapon you might use, that changes everything. A weapon you might use, but choose not to. It sits in the room, changes every conversation. It changes every conversation. It reprices every deal. It shapes investment decisions in Detroit, Stuttgart, Yokohama, and Seoul, without ever firing a shot. That is, according to many analysts, what Beijing has built. Here is what no one is saying out loud. Beijing might want the pause more than the West does. Think about it from China's side. A full reimposition on November 10th would inflict immediate pain on Western industry, but it would also trigger a panic-funded acceleration of Western processing investment. Money into Lynas, MP materials, Indian capacity, European pilot plants. The credible threat, left in place but not detonated, achieves something more useful for Beijing. It keeps Western investment cautious. It keeps prices high enough to fund Chinese producers, unpredictable enough to make competitors nervous. It signals leverage without spending it. There is the question of what Beijing wants in return. Analysts at CSIs point to a list: semiconductors, Taiwan, tariffs, semiconductor manufacturing equipment access, adjustments to Taiwan-related arms sales, tariff reductions on Chinese exports. The rare earth lever is integrated into all of it. Understand what you are looking at. The controls are not about minerals. They are about every negotiation that follows when minerals are on the table. That is the doctrine. Most analysts now expect some partial measure, selective controls kept just severe enough. That is also what makes this story so difficult for the West to respond to. You cannot rally a coalition against ambiguity. You cannot draft policy fast enough. You cannot run a defense procurement plan around an uncertain supply chain. A supply chain whose status depends on next month's diplomatic temperature. For viewers from London, Sydney, Mumbai, or Washington, the policy reality is this. The deadline matters less than the doctrine. The doctrine is now in place, all of it under this leverage. So step back from the calendar. On November 10th, 2026, one of three things will happen. Beijing will extend the suspension. Beijing will reimpose the controls in full. Or, most likely, Beijing will do something in between. Hear this clearly. One country processes 90% of a critical input. The West has no near-term replacement. That will not change on November 10th. The most consequential lever in the critical minerals supply chain will still sit where it has sat since 2010. This was not an accident. It was not a wake-up call. It was a 40-year industrial strategy executed patiently while the world optimized for quarterly margins. The lesson, if there is one, is uncomfortable. Rebuilding an industrial capability is much slower than giving one away. It requires tolerating environmental costs, capital patience quarterly markets cannot reward, and policy continuity across multiple governments. The West is now attempting to do all of that, in compressed form, against a clock it does not control. The G7 just spent 3 days at Evian in the French Alps trying to coordinate a response. 7 of the world's wealthiest economies. 3 days. They left without an agreement on the most basic question: how to collectively reduce dependency on any timeline that matters. That story is next Thursday. The inside of what happened at Evian and what it tells us about the world's most powerful club in 2026. If you want to watch that one when it drops, the subscribe button is right there. The bell tells you. Because the story we just told you about minerals, that is only the first piece. The clock that started in October 2025 is still running. 139 days. Watch this space.